Hello. On this indecisive December day, I'm here to talk to you about the earliest Germanic cultures to sort of break up the Cumbrian videos a little bit. I'm not sure how much noise that's causing on the camera. It's proper going for it now. Not proper going for it, but it's sort of... This can be my nice intro. This is just me standing in the rain. Today, to sort of break up the Cumbrian videos a little bit, I'm going to talk to you about the earliest Germanic cultures. Now, today I'm going to be speaking a little bit about the earliest Germanic cultures, the earliest Germanic people. And it's important to remember when I say Germanic, I'm not talking about anything like modern German culture. The words Germanic and German only sound like each other in English by a sort of, I suppose, coincidence. You know, we're not talking about Germans, we're not talking about old Germans, we're talking about the common ancestors, culturally speaking, of modern Germans, Scandinavians, English people, and indeed speakers of extinct languages like Gothic and Vandalic. Proto-Germanic as a language would have been quite unfamiliar to anyone alive today who does not study Proto-Germanic. It was a very strange language full of nasal vowels and fricatives and things like that. And it's very poorly attested. I don't think it's attested at all actually in writing, aside from a few Latinizations of Proto-Germanic names. You get things close to Proto-Germanic in the form of sort of runic inscriptions in Proto-Norse, but even then you only get very short messages, very short sort of this person made this object, sort of things like that. So the language is only available to us through reconstruction, through the comparative method. We have some snippets of, well, we have quite a lot of material culture preserved, you know, the Germanic parent culture, I suppose you could call it, the Germanic parent cultures are the source of a lot of bog bodies, you know, the Tollen man, things like that. Now, of course, we don't know what the Tollen man would have identified as culturally, we don't know what language he would have spoken, but given where he was and when he lived, there's a decent chance he would have spoken or recognised something very close to Proto-Germanic. So we have very, very, very good physical attestation of these people's presence. The earliest Germanic people probably lived in sort of southern Scandinavia and northern Germany, Denmark. Well, Denmark is Scandinavia, but you know, northern Germany, sort of places like that, this sort of area on a map. But a huge amount of what we know about these people comes from Roman ethnographies, and ethnography, if you don't know, is a sort of study of a particular culture that's alive around at the time. And of course the Romans and the early Germanic people were alive at the same time, around at the same time as each other. And the most famous of these is by Tacitus, who was a Roman historian, and it's called Germania. First, obviously, we have to bear in mind that although the modern Germanic languages descend from one specific dialect, presumably spoken in one specific area by one specific cultural group, and we call this Proto-Germanic, there would have been lots of groups at the time who were culturally similar and linguistically similar, but whose languages just don't have any surviving descendants. Languages that were in essence Germanic, but are cousins of Proto-Germanic rather than descendants of it. Languages, you know, affected by Grimm's law and things like that have Germanic features, but just we can't call them Germanic from an academic perspective because they're not descended from Proto-Germanic. So what Tacitus says, well, it's filtered through a Latinate sort of lens, but that's obviously unavoidable because any ethnography is obviously written within a culture through a cultural lens. It does correlate quite well in certain places with what you'd expect. So, for example, it mentions a goddess Nerthus. Neque qua notabile in singulis, nisi quod in commune Nerthum, id est terram matrem, colunt eamque intervenire rebus hominum, invahi populis arbitrantur. I won't dwell on it for too long because other people have already spoken about it, But Nerthus is probably a Latinization of Nerthus, exactly what you'd expect as a Proto-Germanic form of the Norse god, Njordr. And I'm not very good at pronouncing Norse words. Although he's male, and Nerthus is described as female. Tacitus lists a number of different groups and explains the unusual things he's heard about them. So bear in mind he's never actually been to Germania himself. They drink an alcohol prepared from barley or wheat. The ones that live near the Roman border apparently do buy wine from the Romans and drink it, but Tacitus gives no indication that they make it themselves. They apparently drink a lot, they eat a lot of wild fruit and meat, although obviously, as Tacitus mentions, they do cultivate their own crops. He says the land's quite good for grain, and they also keep their own livestock, obviously. He describes funerals as unceremonious sorts of things, unless the person who's died is particularly important, in which case they're burnt, and sometimes alongside a horse. There's a lot of indication in the archaeology as well that in a lot of Germanic cultures before Christianity was adopted, there was a strong connection between death and horses. Horses were often buried as though they were people. We know the Proto-Germanic word for horse, equus. You might notice it's similar to the Latin word equus. I have to stress this isn't because it was borrowed from anywhere, it's because the two words are cognate with each other. They share a common ancestor in Proto-Indo-European. You can go back to my last video but one, to hear more about that. In terms of culture, he notes that Germanic people tend only to be married to one person except in rare politically driven cases. And he says they don't make wills and that people's wealth automatically goes to their children if they have any. This information is all available freely on the internet. I think there are translations easily accessible through Google. We know from inscriptions a few Proto-Germanic or near Proto-Germanic names. So, Llywelgastir Holtiar was the creator of the Horn of Galahus, or so it says on the horn, and his name is of a language variety somewhere between Proto-Germanic and Old Norse. The original Proto-Germanic pronunciation of the name would be something like Llywelgastir Holtiars. The earliest runic inscriptions are from the first couple of centuries AD in a northern variety of late Proto-Germanic from Fyten in Denmark. All of them have been interpreted in a number of different ways. So the earliest written on a comb says Harja, which most people interpret as meaning comb, apart from one author in the 20s who interpreted it as a shortening of Harjarikar, a personname, a personal name. I don't know enough about Proto-Germanic to know where he gets the Rik part from, although that's a common element in Germanic names. But in any case, most scholars interpret it as meaning comb, although I can see Marstrander's point. Runes are often used to write names, and one wonders why you would write comb on a comb. Another one's been interpreted as a personal name, Undergust Lasawia. By reconstruction, we can be pretty sure of what the names of a lot of gods were. Wodanas, Tundras, Tiwas, which is maybe the most interesting because of its clear descent from Proto-Indo-European Dewas. But what were these characters like in the Proto-Germanic belief system? Well, like I said in the Anglo-Saxon pre-Christian video, we only really have good attestation of stories from Old Norse, and it seems to me to be very unwise to sort of assume identical beliefs in Proto-Germanic times, because we don't have Anglo-Saxon stories or West Germanic stories. You know, we can't triangulate backwards. It seems like Diwas might have been considered the most significant god at some point, and then become less important before the stories about him were written down in Old Norse. In any case, Proto-Germanic culture, whatever that might mean, is a little bit like Proto-Indo-European culture, in that a lot of it is reconstructible only by triangulation of later practices and language, but we have a lot more archaeological evidence from the time Proto-Germanic was spoken, including, and I will finish on this note, this bloke here.